In today's video, I want to talk about why academic definitions of autism often fail struggling neurodiverse marriages today. Have you ever sat across from your therapist, counselor, doctor, or autism specialist and thought, that's not what happens at my house? Maybe you've heard autism described as a difference in social communication. Maybe you've heard that autistic individuals simply process information differently. Maybe you've heard that nobody is trying to hurt anyone and that both partners simply need more understanding. And while all of that may be true, it often leaves struggling couples feeling completely unseen. Because when you're living inside a high conflict neurodiverse marriage, the issue isn't an academic definition. The issue is what happens on Tuesday night when one partner is emotionally flooded and the other partner shuts down, and then both people go to bed feeling abandoned. The issue is what happens when a spouse has spent years trying to explain their pain and keeps hearing, "Well, I didn't mean it." The issue is what happens when one partner experiences sensory overload and the other experiences emotional deprivation, and neither understands what's happening. So today, I want to talk about why academic definitions of autism often fail struggling neurodiverse marriages and what we can do instead. Because if we're going to help couples heal, we have to bridge the gap between diagnostic theory and lived reality. And right now, that gap is enormous. Now, let's look at how the purpose of a diagnosis is not the same as the purpose of a marriage. Let's start with something that sounds obvious but is often forgotten. Diagnostic criteria were never designed to save marriages. They were designed to identify patterns. That's it. Clinical definitions help professionals determine whether someone meets criteria for a diagnosis. That's useful for research, treatment planning, insurance reimbursement. That's useful for understanding populations, but they're not designed to explain why a couple is fighting every weekend. They're not designed to explain why one spouse feels chronically lonely. They're not designed to explain why conversations repeatedly collapse into confusion, defensiveness, or shutdown. The problem is that many couples enter therapy expecting a diagnostic framework to solve a relational problem. And then they discover it doesn't, because a diagnosis explains what something is. It doesn't automatically explain how it affects a marriage. Those are very different conversations. Let's talk about the hidden problem with diagnostic purity. Over the years, I've noticed something very interesting. The more some professionals focus on diagnostic purity, the less helpful they become to struggling couples. What do I mean by diagnostic purity? I mean the insistence that every experience must perfectly fit the textbook definition. If a spouse says, "Well, my partner seems emotionally detached," someone immediately responds, "Well, autistic people have emotions." Of course they do. Nobody's debating that. But notice what just happened. The conversation shifted away from the lived experience. The spouse wasn't making a scientific claim. They were describing what it feels like to live in the relationship. So when we become obsessed with correcting language, we often stop listening to the pain. And once pain goes unheard, healing becomes impossible. Now let's talk about why spouses feel invalidated. One of the most common things I hear from neurotypical spouses is, "I feel like nobody believes me. I talk about my pain and nobody gets it." Not because professionals are malicious, not because anyone is trying to dismiss them, but because their experience doesn't always fit neatly into the clinical language. A spouse may describe years of emotional loneliness, and a professional responds with a lecture on autism. A spouse describes feeling invisible, and a professional explains theory of mind. A spouse describes constant relationship injuries, and a professional explains executive functioning deficits. Again, none of these explanations are wrong, but they're incomplete. Imagine going to a doctor with a broken leg and being given a detailed lecture on bone anatomy. Interesting, sure. Helpful. Not if your leg is still broken. Knowledge without application often feels like dismissal. Now let's talk about what couples actually need. Couples don't need better labels. They need better translations. That's the missing piece. The neurotypical spouse often interprets behavior through an emotional lens. The autistic spouse often interprets behavior through an information processing lens. Each person believes they're seeing reality. Neither realizes they're translating from different operating systems. What's the result? Misunderstanding after misunderstanding after misunderstanding, and then resentment builds and builds and builds. For example, one partner says, "Well, you don't care about me." and the other partner hears, "You're accusing me of being a bad person?" And then defensiveness begins. Conflict escalates. Neither partner understands the real issue. The real issue wasn't lack of caring. The real issue was connection, but the translation never happened. Let's talk about the sensory overload problem nobody talks about enough. Here's another place where academic definitions often fall short. Sensory overload. Clinically, sensory sensitivity may appear as a bullet point on a checklist, but inside a marriage, it's a completely different experience. A partner may walk into a noisy house after work. Children are talking, the television is on, dinner is cooking, the dog is barking, and the autistic partner becomes overwhelmed and withdraws. The neurotypical spouse sees rejection. The autistic spouse experiences survival. Now we have a conflict again. Not because either person is wrong, but because neither person understands what the other is experiencing. This isn't merely a symptom, it's a relationship event. And relationship events require relationship solutions. Let's talk about emotional detachment or emotional inaccessibility. We're going to tackle another controversial topic here. Many spouses describe their autistic partner as emotionally detached. Immediately, critics object. Well, autistic people have emotions. Okay, well, that's absolutely true, but that's not the question. The question is, can those emotions consistently reach the relationship? That's a different issue entirely. A spouse may feel deeply and still struggle to express those feelings in ways their neurotypical partner can receive. The result can look like emotional detachment, even when profound feelings exist underneath. And that distinction matters, because if we focus only on whether emotions exist, we miss the actual relationship problem. The relationship problem is emotional accessibility. That's where the intervention becomes useful. Now, let's talk about why traditional couples therapy oftentimes produces disappointing results. Many therapists treat the conflict itself. Few examine the processing differences driving the conflict. One partner wants emotional validation. The other partner wants factual accuracy. One partner wants empathy first. The other partner wants problem solving first. One partner is discussing feelings. The other thinks they're discussing information. They have entirely different conversations. Without recognizing those differences, therapy can accidentally intensify frustration rather than solve it. Now let's talk about the reframe that changes everything. Here's what I want you to remember. Stop asking who's right and start asking what process is occurring underneath this conflict. That question changes everything. Instead of seeing a cold spouse, you may see sensory exhaustion. Instead of seeing criticism, you may see desperation. Instead of seeing withdrawal, you may see overwhelm. And instead of seeing emotional neediness, you may see attachment injury. This doesn't excuse harmful behavior, but it explains it. And explanation is the beginning of effective intervention. Now, the future of helping neurodiverse couples isn't choosing between science and lived experience. We need both. We need good research. We've got to have accurate diagnosis. We need clinical rigor. But we also need to honor what happens inside real homes, because marriages don't live inside research journals. They live in kitchens, living rooms, bedrooms, holiday gatherings, car rides, and difficult conversations at 10 o'clock at night. So if we want to save struggling neurodiverse marriages, we have to stop treating diagnostic criteria as the finish line. This is the starting line. The real work begins when we translate those clinical concepts into practical tools that help two people understand each other again. Because healing doesn't happen when people feel categorized. Healing happens when people feel understood. And for many neurodiverse couples, that's the bridge they've been searching for all along. Now, if this resonates, please like and subscribe. Also, comment. I will read and respond to your comment. I'll see you in the next video. Would you like to schedule a paid private coaching session? This will be in the form of a face-to-face Zoom call. Underneath any of my videos, you'll see this Calendly link. If you click on that link, it'll open up my calendar. You can pick the available days and times that works for your schedule. You'll get a follow-up email immediately after purchasing a session that will have the Zoom link that coincides with the day and time that you picked. I will get an email too that you scheduled a session, and I will be available on that exact day and time, and we will talk. I look forward to working with you. Hey guys, this is Mark. Some of you may not know that I have a lot of books on Amazon. So if you like my videos, you'll like my books. I have several for ASD spouses, for NT spouses, and for the neurodiverse couple. Underneath any of my videos, you'll see this link. Feel free to click on that link and see what's available. I'm sure you'll find something that applies to you. So if you're struggling in your neurodiverse marriage, help is available, one click away.